When the surgeon cut into her cheek, they didn't expect to find teeth. Real, human tooth buds growing inside her face. One nurse screamed. Another dropped their tray. Even the lead surgeon admitted this was the most disturbing thing she had seen in 20 years. But what's worse than the cyst? The fact that it could have been removed 6 years earlier, and wasn't. If you believe fear or bad decisions can cost us everything, we invite you to subscribe right now. Because what happened to Brianna isn't just shocking, it's a warning. And in the comments, tell us this. Have you ever delayed something important out of fear? A doctor's visit? A tough choice? Your story might help someone else face theirs. Today, Brianna Walsh stood in front of her bedroom mirror, the same cracked oval mirror she had stared into every morning for 6 years. A faint line of sunlight sliced through the blinds and landed across her reflection, splitting her face into two halves. The left side, soft and symmetrical, and the right side, swollen and wrong. Her graduation cap trembled in her hand. She lifted it slowly, the tassel swaying, and then set it down again on the dresser as if it weighed 100 pounds. Her fingers moved to her cheek. The lump was hard and warm under her skin, the size of an egg now, maybe bigger. It had its own shape, its own presence, as if it no longer belonged to her body but had grown into something separate, something alive. The skin stretched shiny over it, faintly pink, and if she pressed too hard she could feel a dull ache that spread into her jaw and ear. She used to trace it with curiosity. Now she touched it only to remind herself that it was real. The reflection staring back at her was not the girl she remembered from middle school. That girl had freckles and a sharp little chin and smiled easily. The girl in the mirror now looked older, harder. Her mouth tilted slightly to the left because the right side of her face bulged outward like a balloon half filled with air. Outside her window, she could hear birds, cars, life moving forward. Inside, everything was still. The hum of her desk fan filled the silence as she whispered, "I can't do it." Her mother's voice floated from the hallway. "Brianna? Honey, are you almost ready?" She didn't answer. Ready for what? Ready to walk across a stage in front of hundreds of people with this thing on her face? Ready to have her picture taken? Forever proof of the deformity that had stolen her adolescence? She pressed her palm flat against her cheek until tears sprang to her eyes. The pain didn't bother her anymore. What hurt was knowing she'd never been allowed to forget it. 6 years. 6 years of living with something that everyone said was nothing. She still remembered the first time she noticed it. 12 years old, standing in front of this same mirror, brushing her hair. There had been a tiny bump under her right cheek, barely noticeable, firm but painless. She'd run to the kitchen to show her mom, excited and a little scared, the way kids are when they find something strange on their bodies. Her mom had looked up from slicing apples and squinted at her face. "Oh, sweetheart, it's probably just a pimple or a little cyst. Don't poke it, okay?" Her dad, reading the newspaper at the table, had asked without looking up, "Should we take her to the doctor? For a bump?" No, let's wait. It'll go away on its own." But it didn't. By the time she turned 13, it was the size of a marble. The doctor they finally went to, Dr. Reynolds, the family pediatrician, had examined it quickly, pressing his fingers around the lump while talking about the weather. Sebaceous cyst, he'd said, pretty common in adolescence, just a clogged oil gland, totally benign. He had smiled the kind of smile that ends conversations. Brianna had believed him. Her parents had too. Why wouldn't they? He was a doctor. But as the years passed, the marble became a walnut. Then a golf ball. Then a reason to hide. Now, at 18, the mirror showed her what the system refused to see. A girl transformed by neglect. Her classmates saw it too, though they didn't call it neglect. They called it names. Tumor girl, lump face, freak. Words that stuck harder than any diagnosis. Brianna picked up her phone from the dresser and opened the front camera. The reflection was worse there, somehow flatter, crueler. She turned her head left, then right, searching for an angle that didn't exist. "Delete," she muttered, closing the app. On her desk, a college acceptance letter lay open. She'd worked so hard for that envelope, for a future away from this town, away from the whispers. But now all she could see was the photo ID she'd have to submit, the face that would follow her into every new beginning. She moved to the window, pulling the blinds apart. Down the street, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. A mother pushed a stroller. 2 girls jogged past, laughing. Brianna pressed her forehead against the glass. For a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to be one of them, normal, unremarkable, invisible in the best possible way. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ellie. "You still coming to rehearsal?" Ellie was the only friend who hadn't disappeared when the lump started to grow. Maybe because Ellie knew what it was like to be invisible for other reasons. She was shy, a little overweight, a quiet artist type who saw beauty where no one else bothered to look. Brianna stared at the message and typed back, "Not sure. I don't want people staring." Seconds later, a reply came. "They'll stare anyway. Come with me. We'll stand together." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she heard footsteps. Her mom appeared at the doorway, holding a steaming mug of tea. Susan's hair was tied back, her eyes tired but kind. "You're not dressed yet," she said softly. "You'll be late." "I'm not going," Brianna said. Susan's face fell. "Honey, we've talked about this. It's your graduation rehearsal. You've worked so hard." "I can't, Mom. Not like this." She turned back to the mirror. "I can't stand up there and pretend everything's fine. Look at me." Susan set the mug down and stepped closer. "You are beautiful, Bri. You've always been beautiful." "Don't say that," Brianna snapped, her voice breaking. "I have a tumor on my face." Silence. Then Susan sighed, her own guilt flickering through her expression. "It's not a tumor," Dr. Reynolds said. "That was 6 years ago," Brianna shouted. "He was wrong." The words hung between them like smoke. Susan sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped. I thought it would go away. I didn't want you to go through surgery so young." Brianna sank beside her, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I didn't want this either." Her mother reached out, brushing her hair aside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lump gleamed faintly in the morning light, almost obscene in its presence. "We'll talk to another doctor," Susan whispered. "After graduation." "After graduation." Brianna laughed bitterly. "That's what you said last year, and the year before that." Susan looked away. "It's expensive, sweetheart. The insurance won't. Then we'll figure it out." Brianna's voice cracked again. "I can't keep living like this." Her mom didn't answer. She just pulled her daughter into her arms, and for a brief second Brianna let herself be held. The smell of her mother's shampoo, the warmth of her sweater, it all felt so heartbreakingly normal. Then Brianna pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I need some air." She slipped past her mother, down the hallway, out the front door. The morning was cool, the kind of day that should have felt hopeful. She walked to the end of the driveway, clutching her phone, then turned on the camera again. The reflection on the screen shimmered under the sunlight, half shadow, half glare. She whispered to herself, "I'm not going to hide anymore." But the words sounded foreign, like lines from someone else's story. She thought of all the years lost to waiting rooms and half answers, the way every appointment ended with, "Let's monitor it." How many times had she wanted to scream, "Monitor what? My life disappearing?" Inside the house, her mother called her name again, but Brianna didn't go back. She stood there on the sidewalk, wind brushing her hair across her face. The graduation cap still sat upstairs on her dresser, untouched. In 1 week, she was supposed to walk across that stage, smile for the camera, and freeze this version of herself forever, in photographs and memories. But she wasn't sure she could do it. She wasn't sure she could even look at herself for one more day. Brianna glanced down at her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. The lump distorted the outline of her face, a permanent reminder of fear, of inaction, of every maybe later she'd ever heard. She didn't know yet that inside that swelling was something far stranger than anyone imagined, something that would make surgeons gasp and nurses scream. For now, all she knew was the weight of 6 years and the silence of a system that had failed her. She was 12 when it first appeared, just a tiny bump, nothing more than a pebble beneath the skin of her right cheek, no larger than the eraser on the end of a pencil. It didn't hurt, it didn't itch, but it was new, and that alone made it important to Brianna. She was brushing her hair in front of the mirror, getting ready for school, when her fingers paused at the soft raised knot beneath her cheekbone. Her first reaction wasn't fear, it was curiosity. She pressed it gently, tilted her face to the side, examined the slight bulge in the morning light. It wasn't visible unless you knew to look for it, but it was there. "Mom?" she called, walking into the kitchen with her fingers still pressed against her face. Susan glanced up from the counter where she was slicing apples for Brianna's lunchbox. "What is it, sweetie?" "I think I have something, like a lump, right here." Brianna stepped closer, pointing to the spot. Susan bent down, inspecting her daughter's face with the squint of a parent toggling between concern and pragmatism. She murmured. Does it hurt? Brianna shook her head. It's probably just a little swollen gland or maybe a blocked pore, Susan said casually. Your face is still changing, you're growing. It'll go away on its own. Her dad, John, peeked over his newspaper. Should we get it checked out? For a bump? Let's give it a week or two, Susan replied. No need to panic. And just like that, the verdict was in. No panic. Brianna trusted her parents, and her parents trusted the system. Why wouldn't they? They were good people, middle class, health insured, rule followers. When things went wrong, you went to the doctor. And the doctor told you if you needed to worry. 2 weeks passed. The bump didn't vanish. It was still small, maybe the size of a pea now, but it was firmer, a little more defined. Susan made an appointment with Dr. Reynolds, the pediatrician Brianna had seen since she was in preschool. He was a kind man with crinkled eyes, a beard that smelled faintly of aftershave, and a cluttered office covered in cartoon animal posters and plastic toys. When Brianna sat on the exam table, legs dangling, he smiled and tapped her file. What brings us in today? There's a bump on her cheek, Susan said. It's been there about 2 weeks, maybe more. Dr. Reynolds placed his fingers gently under Brianna's jaw, tilting her face toward the light. He pressed the bump, then traced around it. Brianna didn't flinch. No pain? No. Good. I think it's a sebaceous cyst, totally benign. Happens when oil glands get blocked. Your body just walls it off. It's very common at your age. Brianna looked at him carefully. Will it go away? Sometimes they do. Sometimes they stay the same size for years. But it's nothing dangerous. He pulled out a notepad, scribbled something quickly. I'm not recommending surgery or scans at this point. No signs of infection, no rapid growth, no discomfort. Let's monitor it and check again in 6 months. If it starts growing or bothering you, we'll reevaluate. Susan nodded, trusting his voice more than her own instinct. Brianna nodded too, though something inside her had already begun to stir, a seed of unease. Outside the clinic, the summer sun was already high. Susan bought her an ice cream on the way home. See? Nothing to worry about, she said, handing over the cone. Brianna smiled, but part of her wanted more than reassurance. She wanted certainty. Weeks passed. Then months. The lump didn't hurt. It didn't change quickly. It just stayed. Brianna began to touch it when she was anxious, her fingers pressing the now marble-sized bump like a worry stone. At 13, her baby fat began to fade, but the right side of her face retained a puffiness that wasn't symmetrical. In photos, it became more noticeable. In mirrors, more frustrating. But still, everyone said the same thing. It's fine. It hasn't grown much. Let's give it time. Time. That's all they seemed to give her. Time and silence. By the time she started 8th grade, the bump was the size of a walnut. Not huge, but prominent. It pulled at the curve of her smile, gave a slight slant to her right eye when she laughed. She brought it up again during her annual checkup. This time, Dr. Reynolds glanced at it for less than 10 seconds. It's the same as before, he said. Still benign. Nothing urgent. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say, but it feels different. It feels like it's part of me now, like it has roots. But she didn't. Because he was the doctor, and she was just a kid. At home, she asked Susan if they could go to a specialist, someone who could scan it, maybe remove it. Susan hesitated. Sweetheart, that's surgery. On your face, I know, there are risks. Scars. What if something goes wrong? What if we wait too long? Her mother didn't answer. Later that week, Susan called the insurance company. Brianna overheard her on the phone pacing the hallway. Yes, a cyst on the face. No, not malignant. Not life-threatening. Yes, cosmetic. Wait, no, she's in pain. A pause. I understand. But when she hung up, Susan's face was flushed. They won't cover it, she said, not meeting Brianna's eyes. Not unless it becomes medically necessary. What does that mean? Susan was quiet for a long time. It means we wait. Brianna felt something cold spread across her chest. It was beginning. Not the bump. No, that had started long ago. What was beginning now was the part no one talked about. The part where your body becomes an afterthought in a system designed for emergencies, not prevention. Where you're told you're lucky because you're not dying, so just live with it. But she was only 13, and she was already learning what it meant to be ignored. Middle school has a way of amplifying everything. Every pimple, every stutter, every slightly off-brand shirt. It's a microscope that turns the smallest differences into open invitations for cruelty. By the time Brianna was 13, the lump had graduated from barely noticeable to unmistakably present. It wasn't huge, about the size of a walnut, but it made her face asymmetrical. Her right cheek curved outward while the left stayed soft and flat. She became an expert in angles. In group photos, she would tilt her head just slightly so that her hair fell over the lump. In class, she chose the far side of the room so no one would sit on her right. She kept a mirror in her locker, not for makeup, but for surveillance. If the lump looked bigger, if the swelling had shifted, if the skin appeared tighter, she needed to know before anyone else did. And yet, kids notice. It started with glances. Quick double takes in the hallway, then whispers, then came the names. It was during lunch, 3 weeks into 8th grade, when the first one landed. "Hey, tumor girl." Brianna had been walking past a group of boys huddled near the vending machines. She froze. Her tray trembled slightly in her hands. "I said," the boy grinned, "did you get stung by a bee, or is your face always like that?" Laughter, some loud, some nervous. Brianna kept walking, trying to will herself invisible, but that one word, tumor, had already anchored itself in the air, a dark, heavy label that clung to her like sweat. The next day, someone had scrawled chipmunk cheek on her locker in black Sharpie. Brianna stared at it for 10 seconds before wiping it off with her sleeve. No one offered to help. The names multiplied: lump face, alien jaw, Two-Face. Kids who didn't even know her name suddenly knew what to call her. She stopped speaking in class, avoided gym, ate lunch behind the art building or in the library with her hoodie pulled low. She never cried in front of them. But she cried in the car, in the bathroom, into her pillow at night. The pain wasn't physical. The lump rarely hurt. What hurt was the way people looked at her, or worse, the way they avoided looking at her at all. She asked her mother again. Could they go back to the doctor? Maybe get the lump removed this time? Susan's face tightened. "I know it's hard, Bree, but surgery is a big deal. There are risks, scars. What if they damage your nerves? But I can't live like this. You're beautiful, sweetheart." "No, I'm not. I'm deformed." Her voice cracked, and the silence that followed was sharp and final. That night, Brianna Googled facial cyst removal. She watched videos. Some medical, some personal blogs. The surgeries looked terrifying, yes, but not nearly as terrifying as living like this forever. She didn't sleep. That week, during group presentations in English class, the teacher assigned her to a group with Ellie. Ellie was quiet, artistic, and always carried a sketch pad. She wasn't popular, but she wasn't targeted either. People left her alone. After class, Ellie tapped Brianna on the shoulder. "Hey," she said gently, "I liked your ideas for the project." Brianna blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "Thanks." Ellie paused. "Can I ask you something?" Brianna's stomach tensed. She waited for the question she hated. Ellie gestured vaguely toward her cheek. "Does it hurt?" Brianna exhaled. "No, not really. Okay." Ellie nodded. People talk, and I figured asking is better than guessing." Brianna didn't know what to say. No one had ever asked kindly before. They started working on the project together. Ellie never stared, never whispered, never treated her like she was fragile. She talked about movies, drawing, books, normal things. One afternoon, Ellie showed Brianna her sketchbook. Inside were dozens of faces, some realistic, some abstract. One page held a drawing of a girl with a slightly curved face, her eyes deep and thoughtful. Brianna stared at it. "That's me," Ellie smiled shyly. "Yeah, I hope that's okay. It's beautiful." Ellie shrugged. "You have a unique face. That's good. You stand out." No one had ever said that to her in a way that didn't feel like a punch. They didn't become best friends overnight, but they started sitting next to each other in art and science class. Ellie never tried to fix her or tell her it wasn't noticeable. She simply made space. It helped, but it didn't erase the rest. Brianna still avoided mirrors, still cried when she got home, still dreamt of waking up and finding her face back to the way it used to be. Her parents scheduled another appointment with Dr. Reynolds. The lump had grown to the size of a golf ball now, firm, unchanging. He examined it again, frowning slightly this time. "Well, it's definitely bigger," he admitted. "Still feels like a benign cyst." but we might consider referring you to a plastic surgeon if you're concerned cosmetically. Brianna's pulse quickened. Would they remove it? Possibly, he said. It would depend on their evaluation, but it's not medically urgent, so insurance might not cover it. Susan looked uneasy. How much would something like that cost? It varies. Anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the surgeon and location. Susan paled. Oh, Dr. Reynolds turned to Brianna. Do you want a referral? She nodded without hesitation. Back in the car, Susan was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Let's think about it, Bri. Just for a little while. A little while turned into 6 more months. The lump did not stop growing, but something inside Brianna had already started to shrink. By the time Brianna turned 15, the lump had become a constant, a presence as familiar as her own name. She no longer hoped it would disappear. Hope had been quietly replaced with endurance. She knew its every curve, every subtle shift in pressure. She knew when it was slightly warmer than usual, when it tingled from the inside, when it seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. And she knew, without needing a doctor to tell her, that it had grown. It was now roughly the size of a golf ball, firm, unmoving, pushing her cheek outward like a stone buried beneath her skin. At school, she had perfected the art of disappearance. She chose the back row, never raised her hand, never volunteered to speak. She ate lunch behind the auditorium. She stopped letting Ellie take photos of them together, even though Ellie never once made her feel less than. At home, mirrors were an enemy. Her bedroom mirror remained, but she'd turned it to face the wall. The lump had begun to define her, publicly, silently. No one said Brianna anymore. They said the girl with the thing on her face. One evening after dinner, as her parents sat silently watching the evening news, Brianna stood in front of them and said, I want the surgery. Susan looked up, startled. What? I want it gone. I'm ready. There was a long pause. John muted the TV. It's getting bigger, Brianna continued. People stare. I can't smile right anymore. I don't want to wait until it gets worse. Her voice trembled. I already missed homecoming. I'm tired of missing everything. Susan set her wine glass down slowly. Okay, she said carefully. Let's start looking. It took weeks to get an appointment with a facial specialist. Most surgeons in network were booked out months in advance. The few that had availability either didn't take their insurance or had poor reviews. Eventually, they found Dr. Chen. His office was in a mid-sized hospital outside Austin, clean and modern, with calming blue walls and framed art that tried a little too hard. Brianna sat in the consultation room with her parents on either side. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, fingers tracing her jeans seam. Dr. Chen entered, tall and composed, a man in his early 50s with a kind face and an efficient tone. He examined the lump with gloved hands, taking his time, pressing and palpating around the edges, asking gentle questions. When did this first appear? Any history of trauma to the area? Have you had any imaging done yet? Susan explained that they had seen a pediatrician, but no scans had ever been ordered. Dr. Chen ordered an MRI immediately. When the results came back, he sat them down and pulled up the scans. What we're looking at, he said, pointing to the glowing mass on the screen, is a dermoid cyst. It's not cancerous, and it's not life-threatening, but it is complex. He turned toward them. Dermoid cysts are formed from embryonic tissue. They can contain a mixture of skin, hair follicles, sweat glands, and sometimes even bone or teeth. They're congenital, meaning it was likely present since birth, but they don't typically become noticeable until puberty. Brianna swallowed hard. There's hair in it? Dr. Chen nodded. Possibly. We won't know for sure until we remove it. But that would be consistent with what we see here. The shape, density, and its slow progression. It all fits. He clicked through the scans. The good news is it hasn't infiltrated deep into muscle tissue. But it's pressing against facial structures, which means if it keeps growing, it could affect nerve function or cause long-term asymmetry. So we need to remove it, John said. Yes. I recommend surgery. It would be done under general anesthesia. I'd make a small incision along the cheek, remove the cyst carefully, and close with layered sutures. There would be a scar, but I'd do my best to place it along natural lines of the face. Risks? Susan asked. As with any surgery, infection, bleeding, scarring, and possible damage to the facial nerve. That last one is rare, but something we take seriously. Brianna looked at her mom, her voice small. Can we do it? Susan was quiet. She looked overwhelmed. Dr. Chen handed over an estimate. Surgery cost $9,700. Anesthesia, $2,300. Facility fee, $4,100. Brianna's heart sank. John asked, "What about insurance?" Dr. Chen hesitated. "That depends on your provider. Some plans consider facial dermoid cysts cosmetic, unless they cause functional impairment. You'll need a pre-authorization, and even then, it may be partially denied." When they got home, Susan made calls, hours on hold. Speaking to representatives who transferred her from department to department, the verdict came a few days later. Insurance would cover 20%. The rest, over $12,000, would fall to them. Susan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paper in her hands. "We don't have this kind of money," she whispered. "We could take out a loan," John suggested, "or a payment plan." "But what if something goes wrong?" Susan said. "What if she ends up with nerve damage? What if the scar doesn't fade?" Brianna stood in the doorway, listening. She was not angry, she was numb. That night, her parents sat her down. "We think," Susan began, "maybe we should wait a little longer. Until you're older. Maybe when you're 18, you can decide for yourself. You'll be legally able to consent, and maybe we'll have saved more by then." "I'm deciding now," Brianna said. "I want it gone." Susan's voice cracked. "It's not that simple, Bri. We're trying to protect you." Brianna stared at her. "No, you're trying to protect yourselves. You're scared. So am I, but I have to live with this. You don't." There was no shouting, just the sound of something breaking quietly, invisibly, between them. Brianna didn't bring it up again, not for a long time. She went back to school. Back to silence, back to pretending. The lump remained, so did the waiting. When Brianna turned 16, her mother finally said the words she had been waiting years to hear. "Let's do it." It happened one night in early March. The spring air warmed through the open kitchen window, the smell of rain still lingering on the grass. Susan had been sitting at the table staring at bills, her calculator blinking a number that didn't add up. Then she looked up at Brianna, standing in the doorway, her cheek visibly swollen even in the dim light, and said softly, "You were right, we need to get this thing out." Brianna didn't trust the moment at first. She stood frozen. "You mean it?" Susan nodded. "Yes. I'll call Dr. Chen's office tomorrow. I promise." It felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. For the first time in years, Brianna dared to believe that her face, her life, might finally be hers again. The next morning, Susan called the clinic. Dr. Chen's nurse picked up after 20 minutes on hold. "I'm afraid the doctor's surgical calendar is completely full until September," she said cheerfully, as though announcing a weather report. "September?" Susan repeated, stunned. "It's March." "Yes, ma'am. There's a very long waiting list for elective procedures." "It's not elective," Susan snapped. "It's pressing against her nerves. She's losing sensation." "I understand, but it's not coded as an emergency under her current diagnosis." Susan hung up, shaking. She called their insurance provider next. The representative told her that if she wanted a faster date, she could request an out-of-network referral to a private clinic. But they would have to pay the difference in cost. How much of a difference? "Well," the woman said, typing loudly on her keyboard, "that would bring your out-of-pocket to around $18,000. The line went quiet. That night, Susan and John argued in the kitchen after Brianna had gone to bed. "She's losing feeling in her face," Susan hissed. John rubbed his temples. "I know, but we can't just conjure up $18,000. We've already got the second mortgage and the car payments. Then what do we do? Wait another 6 months while it grows into her skull?" John's voice cracked. "You think I don't feel sick every time I look at her?" Silence. Then Susan whispered, "She's our daughter, John. We should have done something years ago." Upstairs, Brianna lay awake, listening. The sound of their voices blurred into a low hum, heavy and familiar. It wasn't anger that broke her heart. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of fighting the same invisible war. The next morning, she noticed something new. When she brushed her teeth, the right corner of her mouth didn't move quite the same way. It drooped slightly. She touched her cheek. Her fingertips met her skin but felt nothing. A strange, numbing void. She pressed harder. Still nothing. Panic rose like a tide. At breakfast, she said quietly, "I think I'm losing feeling on this side." Her mother froze. "What do you mean?" "Right here." Brianna traced along her jawline. "It feels like it's asleep, like when your foot falls asleep. But it doesn't wake up. Susan stared, her hands trembling. They were back at Dr. Chen's office within a week. He examined her carefully, frowning. It's pressing on the facial nerve, he said finally. That explains the numbness. It hasn't damaged the nerve yet, but it's only a matter of time. We really shouldn't delay much longer. So what can we do? John asked. Dr. Chen sighed. I can put you on a cancellation list. If someone reschedules, we'll call immediately. Otherwise, you'll need to wait for the next available slot. How long? 4 to 6 months. Brianna's stomach dropped. After the appointment, they sat in the parking lot in silence. The air conditioning hummed, blowing cold air on faces that felt too warm. Finally, Susan said, We'll wait for the call. Maybe something will open sooner. But nothing did. Weeks turned into months. The lump grew again, spreading slightly toward her ear. The skin was tight, glossy under the light. It wasn't painful, but it throbbed at night when she lay on her side. By summer, the numbness had spread across half her cheek. Her smile was visibly lopsided. Photos were out of the question. She stopped FaceTiming anyone, even Ellie. Sometimes, in the quiet of her room, she pressed her fingernail against her cheek until it almost broke the skin, just to see if she could feel something. Nothing. That July, Susan called the hospital again, her voice brittle with desperation. Please, she begged the nurse. She's losing nerve function. Can't you do something? The nurse's tone softened. Mrs. Walsh, I'm so sorry. The system prioritizes based on life-threatening urgency. She's on the list, but she's not dying, Susan said bitterly. No, ma'am, not dying. Those words echoed for days afterward. Not dying, as if that were the same as living. Brianna's 16th birthday came and went without celebration. Her parents gave her a necklace with a tiny silver charm shaped like a star. She smiled politely, but when she looked in the mirror, she saw the pendant resting against her collarbone and thought, stars don't shine under shadows. By late August, she had grown quiet, withdrawn. Ellie still messaged her every few days, photos of sunsets, snippets of poetry, but Brianna rarely responded. It wasn't that she didn't care, she just didn't have the energy to pretend. Then, one night, while brushing her hair, she noticed something terrifying. The lump had begun to pull downward, a heaviness that dragged her skin ever so slightly toward her jawline. It was subtle but unmistakable, a sign that gravity was winning. She leaned close to the mirror and whispered, You're winning. The next morning, she told her parents she wanted to postpone surgery until after senior year. They were stunned. Postpone? John said. Bree, the doctor said. I know what he said. But I can't do it right now. I can't miss school. I can't deal with this and college apps and SATs and everything. You can't keep waiting, Susan pleaded. It's dangerous. I just need time. Time. The word had become their curse. In truth, she wasn't thinking about exams or college. She was thinking about fear, the sterile smell of hospitals, the beeping machines, the thought of being cut open. Every YouTube video she'd ever watched replayed in her mind, each one a montage of blood and stitches and trembling hands. He was terrified. Barsh, terrified of surgery, terrified of waking up different, terrified of not waking up at all. Oh, she chose the only thing that seemed safe. Delay. When she walked into her bedroom that night, she turned her mirror back to face the wall. Why the fall of her senior year, Brianna had mastered the art of vanishing in plain sight. He moved through the halls of her high school like a ghost, head down, earbuds in, backpack slung over one shoulder like a shield. Her face was no longer something she could hide. The lump had grown to the size of a small egg, large enough to warp the shape of her cheek and jawline, stretching the skin tight and shiny. IDs didn't call her names anymore. They didn't have to. Their silence was its own form of cruelty, sharp, cold, and far more effective than words. She no longer tried to sit at the back of the class. It didn't matter where she sat. No one looked at her. Not really. Even teachers hesitated now. Some glanced at the lump and looked away quickly, pretending not to see it. Others offered strained smiles and polite overcompensation, which felt just as isolating. The numbness had spread further. She couldn't feel the lower part of her right cheek at all anymore, and sometimes her eye twitched involuntarily. Her mother insisted it was time, really time, to get the surgery done. We'll call Dr. Chen again, she said one night. We'll push harder. There must be something they can do. But Brianna shook her head. It's too late, she said softly. I can't do it right now. I have graduation, senior photos, college applications. I can't deal with this too. You can't deal with this because of that, Susan said, voice cracking. I said no. She went upstairs and closed her bedroom door, pressing her back against it like a barrier. Then she slid to the floor and cried into her hoodie sleeves until her throat hurt. She was 18 and already felt like her life had ended. She didn't go to football games or senior bonfires. She didn't go to homecoming or the Halloween dance. She didn't talk to boys, didn't wear makeup, didn't shop for prom dresses. Her entire existence revolved around staying small, staying quiet, staying unseen. She turned down every invitation from Ellie, who now lived in another state but still reached out through texts and voice messages. Ellie, I wish you'd call me. You don't have to talk. Just let me hear you breathing, okay? Brianna never replied. She spent her afternoons lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her fingers drifting absent-mindedly to the lump. It felt foreign and familiar at once, like a parasite she'd grown up with, like a part of herself she wished she could amputate. Sometimes, she imagined cutting it out with her dad's hunting knife. She could see it clearly, slicing into her cheek, the blood, the wet, jelly-like mass slipping out, her reflection finally whole again. The image both terrified and comforted her. Senior portraits were scheduled in late April. Susan booked the appointment and told Brianna 3 days before. You don't have to smile, she said, handing her a flyer from the studio. Just show up. You'll regret it if you don't have any photos. Brianna stared at the flyer, then tossed it into the trash. She didn't show up. A week later, Susan found her curled up on the floor of her closet, knees to her chest, hands pressed over her cheek. I can't do this, Brianna whispered. Susan crouched beside her. We'll find someone. I'll call every surgeon in the state. I'll beg if I have to. I don't care if there's a scar. I don't care if it hurts. I just want it gone. There was a long pause. Then graduation is in a week, Susan said carefully. We probably can't. Then I'm not going. What? I'm not going to graduation. I'm not walking across that stage looking like this. I won't have those pictures forever. I'd rather disappear than have to prove this happened. Her voice shook with every word. Susan looked at her daughter, really looked. She saw not just the swelling in her cheek or the stiffness in her smile, but the deep cracks beneath all of it. The pain that had taken root in her daughter's soul and refused to leave. I'll make calls, she said. Brianna didn't believe her at first. She'd heard it before, promises that dissolved into nothing. But this time Susan meant it. She spent that entire day dialing surgeons, hospitals, and private clinics. She searched Reddit threads, Facebook groups, YouTube recovery stories, anything to find someone who could do the surgery quickly, someone who could help before it was too late. And the third day, a receptionist at a nearby teaching hospital finally said, Actually, we might be able to fit her in, but she'll need to see Dr. Martinez first for evaluation. She's the head of maxillofacial surgery. If anyone can help, it's her. Susan wrote down the name. When she told Brianna, there was no excitement, only wary disbelief. She'll just say the same thing as everyone else, Brianna muttered. Wait, delay, insurance doesn't cover it. Come back in 6 months. Maybe, Susan said. But what if she doesn't? Brianna stared out the window for a long time before saying, Fine, I'll go. The appointment was set for the next afternoon. For the first time in years, Brianna went to bed with a whisper of something she hadn't felt in so long she barely recognized it. Hope. The waiting room of the university hospital was nothing like the smaller clinics Brianna had grown used to. It was bright, modern, filled with quiet murmurs and the soft sound of keyboards clacking behind the reception desk. Students in scrubs moved through the halls with clipboards and coffee cups. Everything smelled faintly like antiseptic and lavender air freshener. It almost tricked her into thinking this was just another routine checkup, but it wasn't. This time it felt different. This time there was a clock ticking. Dr. Maria Martinez entered the exam room without fanfare. She was in her late 40s, tall and composed, with a streak of silver in her hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. There was no performative smile, no sugarcoating, just professionalism and something Brianna hadn't seen in a long time, focus. She shook Brianna's hand firmly. I've reviewed your records. You've been dealing with this for quite a while. 6 years, Brianna replied, not meeting her eyes. Dr. Martinez nodded. That's far too long. She asked questions, smart, direct ones. When did the numbness begin? Was there ever drainage or pain? How had the mass changed in shape over time? Then she examined the lump herself, using gloved hands to trace the perimeter of the growth. Her touch was firm but careful, her expression unreadable. Brianna watched her mother watching the doctor. Everyone was holding their breath. "Can you feel this?" Dr. Martinez asked, pressing a spot near Brianna's jaw. "Sort of. And here?" "No. That part's numb." Dr. Martinez looked up. "That's concerning. I'm ordering an MRI, full imaging of the face and upper neck. I need to know what we're dealing with before we schedule anything." That afternoon, Brianna lay inside the MRI tube, still as stone, while the machine hummed and clicked around her. She closed her eyes and tried not to cry. Not from fear this time, but from something deeper. Exhaustion, resignation, hope maybe curling uncomfortably against dread in the pit of her stomach. 2 days later, they returned to Dr. Martinez's office to hear the results. This time, the air was heavier. Dr. Martinez pulled up the scans on a large monitor and turned to Brianna and her mother. "What you have is a large, mature dermoid cyst, but this isn't a simple case. It has grown not only outwardly, but internally, into the deeper soft tissues of your cheek." She pointed to the glowing 3D image on screen. The lump looked almost alien, like a bulbous root system digging deep into Brianna's face. "It's pressing against the facial nerve here," she said, tracing a line. "That's why you're experiencing numbness. But that's not all." She zoomed in on another section. "Inside the cyst, we can see multiple tissue types. That shadow there? Likely sebaceous content, basically oil glands. That density? Hair follicles. And here, this bright white calcification." She clicked again. "These are tooth buds. Small fragments of dental tissue. Not fully formed teeth, but close." Brianna felt her stomach lurch. "There are teeth in it?" Dr. Martinez gave a single solemn nod. "Yes, this is not uncommon in dermoid cysts. They form from embryonic cells, cells that were supposed to become skin, teeth, even bones. But they ended up trapped during fetal development and formed this structure instead." Susan put a hand to her mouth. Her face was pale. Brianna couldn't stop staring at the image. That thing had been growing inside her for 18 years, slowly, quietly, changing her face, stealing her adolescence, stealing her life. "Can you get it out?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. "I can," Dr. Martinez said. "But I won't lie to you. It will be a complicated surgery." She pulled up a digital diagram. "I'll need to make a significant incision along the cheek. The cyst is wrapped around delicate facial structures, so I'll have to carefully separate it from muscle, connective tissue, and the facial nerve. The operation will take several hours, and it must be done under general anesthesia." Susan's voice shook. "What are the risks?" "Nerve damage is the biggest concern," the doctor replied honestly. "There's a chance of partial paralysis, drooping, loss of muscle control. I'll do everything I can to avoid it. Scarring is also unavoidable. The incision will likely be 4 to 5 inches. Over time it will fade, and we can look into revision surgery later, but it won't disappear completely." "I don't care," Brianna said. Her voice was firmer now, steady. "I just want it gone. I've lived with this thing long enough." Dr. Martinez paused, then she nodded slowly. "I can do the surgery in 3 days. We had a last-minute cancellation. But we'll need to act fast. Paperwork, pre-op labs, anesthesia consult." "Let's do it," Susan said. For once, there was no hesitation. Brianna sat very still as the appointment ended. Her mind was spinning, but not with fear this time, with clarity. For the first time in years, she knew what was coming next, and it wasn't more waiting. She would go under the knife. She would let them cut her open. She would finally face the monster inside. When they returned home that night, she sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out her phone. She opened the camera. For a long moment, she stared at her own reflection. Then, for the first time in years, she pressed record. "I'm getting surgery in 3 days," she said to the camera. "And this is what I look like before." Her voice broke, just a little. "I want to remember, not because I'll miss this, but because I survived it." She stopped recording. Save the file. Then she finally exhaled. The morning of the surgery, the hospital felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the sterile air, or maybe it was the weight of 6 years pressing down on Brianna's chest as she changed into the paper-thin hospital gown and climbed onto the gurney. The nurse's hands were kind but efficient as she placed the 4-line. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" she asked. Brianna nodded, though her throat was too tight to speak. Her mother sat beside the bed, holding her hand with white-knuckled fingers. Neither of them had slept the night before. "You're brave," Susan whispered, voice thick with guilt and pride. "I'm terrified," Brianna replied, barely above a whisper. "That's how brave starts." The anesthesiologist came in, explaining the process in a calm, practiced tone. A second nurse marked her cheek with a surgical pen, tracing a curved line along her jaw. Then Dr. Martinez arrived, dressed in scrubs, her surgical cap already on. She smiled. Not a fake one, not forced, just steady. Grounding. "You ready to say goodbye to this thing?" she asked. Brianna swallowed hard. "I've been ready for years." The last thing she remembered was the anesthesiologist saying, "Okay, Brianna, count back from 10. She got to 7. And then, nothing. Inside the operating room, the hum of machines filled the silence. A surgical tech prepared the instruments, while Dr. Martinez stood over Brianna's face, studying the marked lines like a cartographer tracing an ancient map. The incision began near her right ear, curving down toward the corner of her jaw. "Doctor." Martinez cut through the outer layers of skin, with slow, deliberate precision, careful not to damage the facial nerve just beneath. "This thing is deeper than I thought," she murmured, using a retractor to open the incision wider. As she worked deeper, the texture changed. The cyst wall came into view, a thick, pale membrane with a yellowish hue. She began separating it from the surrounding tissue, dissecting carefully around the nerve bundle that controlled facial movement. Every millimeter counted. The room was silent except for the beeping heart monitor and the soft rustle of gloved hands. After nearly 4 hours, Dr. Martinez stood upright and said, "It's free." She held the mass in both hands, placing it into a metal surgical tray. It was the size of a chicken egg, maybe larger, firm, lumpy, slightly misshapen. "Jesus," one of the nurses whispered. Dr. Martinez looked at her assistant. "Get pathology and photography in here. This is a specimen we'll want to document." She picked up a pair of surgical scissors and, without ceremony, made a deep incision through the cyst's wall. What spilled out was something between a nightmare and a medical miracle. Thick, dark hair, long strands of it, spilled onto the tray, tangled and matted in clumps. It was soaked in a yellowish, waxy substance, sebum, the oil produced by skin glands. Embedded in the mass were 2 calcified fragments, white and sharp. "Are those teeth?" the younger surgical nurse said, stepping back. "Looks like tooth buds," Dr. Martinez confirmed. Dermoid cysts can contain a variety of tissues, hair, sebaceous material, even bone or cartilage. It all depends on what the embryonic cells were trying to become before they got stuck. She took a photo for the case file. It was both grotesque and oddly fascinating, proof of nature's strangeness and of how long this growth had gone unchecked. She looked at the tray and then back at the girl lying unconscious on the table. "This thing lived in her face for 18 years, she said softly. "It almost took her life. Not physically, but everything else." She returned to Brianna's cheek and began the painstaking work of closing the incision. Layer by layer, stitching muscle, fascia, dermis, and finally skin. The scar would be long, but clean. With time and care, it would fade. Brianna woke in recovery with a dry mouth and a ringing in her ears. At first, the world came back to her in pieces. Sound, then light, then the sterile scent of alcohol and latex. Her mother's face appeared above her, blurry at first. "Bree?" Susan said, voice trembling. Brianna blinked slowly. "Is it gone?" Susan nodded, tears already sliding down her cheeks. "It's gone, baby, all of it. Dr. Martinez said she got it clean." Brianna raised her hand to her face and winced as the bandages pulled slightly. She could feel swelling, tightness, but the weight was gone. It was strange, like something was missing, but not in a painful way, like a heavy book she'd carried in her backpack for years had finally been taken out. She didn't cry. Not yet. But she smiled. Just a little. The nurse came in with medication and a glass of water. Dr. Martinez followed a few minutes later, holding a folder in one hand and looking both exhausted and triumphant. "You did great," she said, sitting beside the bed. "You were under for about 4 hours. Everything went as expected. Did it? Was it really?" Dr. Martinez opened the folder, showing her the photos. Brianna stared. There it was. A mound of dark hair, wet and tangled, clumps of fatty material, and unmistakably, 2 tooth-like fragments gleaming like something out of a horror movie. "That was inside me?" Dr. Martinez nodded. It's a classic dermoid. Hair, oil, dental tissue. Completely benign, but it was growing. It had already begun pressing into your facial nerve. If we'd waited another year, you might have lost permanent function. Brianna exhaled slowly. I'm glad I didn't wait. So are we, the doctor said. You were lucky, and strong, as doctor. Martinez left the room. Susan leaned in, brushing a piece of hair from Brianna's forehead. You did it, she whispered. You really did it. That night, Brianna couldn't sleep. She lay in her hospital bed staring at the ceiling, doped up on pain meds but wide awake. She thought of everything, of the hallway stairs, the laughter, the silence, the mirror she hadn't looked into properly in years, of the tooth growing in her cheek, and then she laughed. A quiet, breathy, ridiculous laugh. I had a damn tooth in my face, she whispered to no one. She laughed until she cried. And for the first time in years, she didn't cry because she was broken. She cried because something had finally been removed, something heavy, something monstrous, and something like hope had finally taken its place. Brianna spent the first few days after surgery floating in and out of sleep. The swelling on her face was intense. Her cheek felt hot and tender, stretched and stitched tight, a dull throb pulsing beneath the skin. But beneath the ache, beneath the bruises and the bandages, there was a strange, deep stillness. The pressure that had defined her face for so long was gone. For the first time in years, her face felt hers. The nurses came in regularly to check her vitals, adjust her administer painkillers. Dr. Martinez visited each morning, satisfied with her progress. No signs of infection, healing clean, she said on day 2. We'll remove the stitches in about 10 days, but the swelling will go down before that. By the 4th day, Brianna was able to sit up in bed without dizziness. Susan helped her to the bathroom, where she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror for the first time since the operation. She froze. There was a thick white bandage running from her ear down her cheek. Her skin was swollen and bruised in purples and greens. She looked like she'd been in a car crash, but the lump was gone. For a second, she didn't believe it. Her hand moved up, trembling, brushing carefully against the dressing, following the curve of her face. Smooth, symmetrical, flat. She burst into tears. Susan was right there, holding her, letting her sob into the hospital gown. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Something had shifted. Quietly, powerfully, forever. 2 days later, Brianna was discharged. She walked out of the hospital wearing a hoodie and a mask, oversized sunglasses hiding most of her face. But it wasn't about shame this time. It was privacy. She wasn't hiding from the world. She was preparing to reintroduce herself to it. At home, she spent hours staring at her reflection. Her cheek was still puffy, and the scar line was raw and red. But she could already see the shape of her own face re-emerging. A stranger might have seen a girl recovering from facial trauma. Brianna saw resurrection. She took another video, just for herself. 5 days post-op, she said quietly into the camera. Still swollen, still sore. But I don't look like a monster anymore. I can't believe it's real. She turned her face slightly. I didn't think I'd ever see this side of my face again. Then she smiled, an awkward, lopsided, still recovering smile, but it was hers. Graduation was in 3 days. Are you sure? Susan asked. You don't have to go. You can wait for the next surgery. Let the scar heal. But Brianna shook her head. No, I'm going. I missed everything else. I'm not missing this. She practiced walking across the living room, even though her balance was still off and her cheek throbbed with every step. She practiced smiling in the mirror. Not to look good, just to remember how it felt. On the day of graduation, she stood in front of the mirror in her room, wearing her cap and gown. The scar was still visible, curling across her cheek in a red arc. She'd used a little makeup to soften it, but she didn't try to erase it. It was a part of her now, a mark of survival. A line drawn between the girl she had been and the woman she was becoming. She stared at her reflection, almost daring herself to flinch. She didn't. Downstairs, Susan waited with the camera. John stood by the door, awkward in a suit he hadn't worn since Brianna's 8th grade play. You look amazing, her dad said, his voice cracking. I look like me, she replied. The auditorium was packed, rows of families, students in matching blue gowns, faculty in full regalia. Lights shimmered overhead, and the room buzzed with laughter, music, and the unmistakable thrill of something ending. Brianna stood in line behind a boy she didn't know well. No one looked at her funny. No one whispered. She saw a few people glance at her scar, but their eyes didn't linger. They didn't stare at her the way they used to. When her name was called, Brianna Walsh, there was a brief pause. Then, applause, not polite, not pitiful, just warm. She stepped onto the stage. The lights hit her face full on, and she didn't duck her head. She walked with her shoulders back, chin up, her cap balanced perfectly on her auburn hair. She took the diploma, shook the principal's hand, and turned toward the camera. Flash. The photo would show her standing tall, smiling slightly, the long red scar etched across her cheek like a story only she could tell. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't Tumor Girl. She wasn't the monster, or the outcast, or the lump. She was Brianna, a girl who had lived with fear for 6 years, a girl who chose courage, a girl who had her future back. Later that night, Susan found her sitting on the back porch, barefoot, in her gown, holding the diploma in her lap. "You were incredible up there," she said, sitting beside her. "I was scared," Brianna admitted. "You didn't look it." "I was still scared," she repeated. Then she smiled. "But I did it anyway." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "What's that?" Susan asked. "My video diary," Brianna said. "I've been recording the whole time, from before the surgery. I think I want to post it, like online. Maybe someone else is going through this too." Susan paused, her eyes misting. "Do you think you're ready for that kind of attention?" Brianna nodded. "I think I'm done being invisible." That night she uploaded her first video, titled The Lump. In it she spoke directly to the camera. Calm, clear. She showed pictures from every year, how the lump grew, how it warped her face, how people treated her, how she felt. She showed the MRI images, then the surgical photos, the hair, the oil, the teeth. "I lived with this for 6 years, she said in the closing. "Not because it was impossible to fix, but because I was afraid. My parents were afraid, and the healthcare system failed to push harder, sooner. I lost years, I lost memories, I lost me." She looked straight into the lens, "But I got her back." She paused, then added softly, "And if you're out there hiding too, I want you to know, you can too." The video went viral within 24 hours. 2 years passed. The scar on Brianna's cheek had faded from angry red to a soft silvery line that curved like a comma near her smile. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like punctuation, a mark between what was and what would be. She was 20 now, a psychology major at a state university 3 hours from home. Nobody there knew her story at first. To them, she was just another student with bright hair and a slightly lopsided grin. It was a small freedom she cherished every single day. Her mornings were ordinary now: coffee, early classes, long walks across campus in the soft light of Texas sun. But sometimes, when she caught her reflection in a window or passed a mirror, she'd pause, not out of self-consciousness, but gratitude. Every day she still touched the scar, tracing its curve with her fingertip, grounding herself in the reality that she was still here. The blog she started after graduation, The Lump, had grown far beyond anything she expected. What started as one post about her surgery had turned into a community. Thousands of readers, hundreds of stories. Some were from people who had dermoid cysts, terrified to face surgery. Others were from parents unsure how to advocate for their children. And some came from people who didn't have physical lumps at all, but carried invisible ones: shame, grief, fear. They all began their messages the same way: "I saw your video, and I think I'm ready now." Brianna answered every single one. She didn't give medical advice. She wasn't a doctor, but she gave something rarer: empathy. She knew what it was like to live with something growing inside you while the world told you to wait. She knew the cost of silence. When a medical school in Dallas reached out, asking permission to use her case in their training materials, she said yes without hesitation. During the lecture, the professor projected her MRI on the screen, those bright scans of bone, muscle, and that grotesque alien mass. "This," he told the students, "is what happens when fear, systemic delay, and insurance barriers intersect." The room was quiet. "This is why we don't dismiss. This is why we listen." Brianna sat in the back row that day, anonymous among the crowd. When the lecture ended, a few students approached her afterward. "Were you?" one of them asked. She smiled and tapped her scar. "Yeah, that was me." They just stared, speechless, not out of pity but awe. She still saw Dr. Martinez once a year for checkups. They'd become something like friends, doctor and patient turned mentor and student. Every visit was a reminder of how far she'd come. "How's the scar treating you?" Dr. Martinez asked during one appointment. "I forget it's there most days," Brianna said, "until someone asks." Dr. Martinez smiled. "That's the best kind of healing." "Do you still show my photos to students?" Brianna asked. "Always. You've saved more people than you realize." Brianna's voice softened. "Then it was worth it. It was always worth it," the doctor replied. Her story reached national news the summer after her sophomore year. A journalist from a health network had come across her viral post and asked to interview her for a segment called Faces of Resilience. The crew filmed in her apartment, light diffusing through the window as she sat in front of her laptop, surrounded by notes and messages from readers. The interviewer asked, "If you could tell your 12-year-old self one thing, what would it be?" Brianna thought for a long time before answering. "I'd tell her that fear isn't safety," she said. "It's just another kind of prison. And what about people watching who might be afraid to get help?" She looked straight into the camera, eyes steady. "Don't wait. Don't hide. The longer you wait, the harder it gets. Not just physically, but emotionally. I lost 6 years of my life because I thought waiting was safer. It wasn't. It never is." When the segment aired, thousands more people reached out. Parents, teenagers, even doctors. Some shared gratitude, some apologies, some confessions. One message from a woman in Ohio read, "My daughter had the same kind of cyst. We saw your video and decided not to wait. Her surgery was last week. She's healing beautifully. Thank you for giving us the courage we didn't have." Brianna read it 3 times, then cried quietly into her hands. She never forgot what it felt like to live behind that lump, to feel every glance, every whisper, every cruel joke. But she also never forgot the kindnesses. Ellie's first sketch, Dr. Martinez's steady hands, her mother's voice cracking as she whispered, "I'm sorry." Those pieces made her whole again. One night, sitting on her dorm balcony, she opened her phone and scrolled to an old photo, one taken the day before her surgery. The girl in the picture looked fragile, exhausted, lost behind the weight of her own fear. Brianna stared at her for a long time. Then she whispered, "You did it." She opened the front camera and took a new photo, side by side with the old one. The difference was almost unrecognizable, not just in her face but in her eyes. The caption she posted read, "6 years of waiting, 1 surgery, a lifetime of lessons. Fear doesn't protect you, it just grows with you. Choose action, choose courage, choose life." The post exploded overnight. Months later, she was invited to speak at a youth mental health conference. Standing on stage before hundreds of students, she shared her story, not as tragedy, but as transformation. She talked about fear and silence and the way people mistake endurance for strength. She talked about how healthcare had failed her, but also how humanity had saved her. She ended her talk with the same question she always asked at the end of her videos. What's the lump in your life? The thing you're too scared to face, too scared to cut out? Because it doesn't have to be on your face to grow inside you. The auditorium went silent. Then applause, long, thunderous, unending applause. For a moment, Brianna just stood there, eyes glistening, heart full. She wasn't the girl with the lump anymore. She was the girl who taught people how to remove theirs. That night, back in her dorm room, she looked at herself in the mirror, one last time before bed. The scar caught the light, a faint silver line across her cheek. She smiled at it. It smiled back. And in that quiet reflection, Brianna saw everything she had lost, and everything she had gained. She whispered, almost like a prayer, "Don't wait, don't hide, cut it out." Then she turned off the light, and for the first time in her life, she didn't look away. Sometimes, the things growing inside us aren't just physical. They're fear, doubt, silence. And if we leave them alone long enough, they don't just stay, they grow. They steal years, memories, and parts of ourselves we can never get back. But healing? It begins the moment we decide to stop hiding and start choosing courage. Brianna's scar may never fully fade, but it no longer defines her. What defines her is the choice she made to stop waiting and start living. Visual, a slow zoom on Brianna's graduation photo, scar visible, but her eyes bright and proud, a soft fade to black. Now we want to hear from you. What's something you've been avoiding for too long? What's your lump, and what would it take to finally face it? Leave a comment. Someone out there may need your courage to find their own. If this story moved you, hit that like button. And if you believe more people need stories that heal and reveal, subscribe to our channel today. We tell true stories that stay with you, stories that make you think, feel, and maybe take action.